Today in our chair, we have a special guest. Somebody that some of you may recognize and some of you may not have taken any of his classes yet. Dr. Bob Williams is with us, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his reading history. Take it away, Dr. Bob.
Well,
Yay!
actually, instead of talking about that, I'm used to teaching research methods, so I'm going to talk about little statistics today. This is a regression. No, you don't want to.
You're going to regress, but in a different way. You're digressing now.
I'm digressing now. If you all remember Dick Tracy and B.O. Plenty and the good old comic strips, every time B.O. Plenty got involved in some kind of crime scene, they would say, now take it easy, start at the beginning. And he always started, well, I was one of 8 and Pappy took us west in 87. I'm going to start at the beginning. I grew up in the backwoods of North Florida, which is not at all like the southern part of the state, way real country. And my father was a sharecropper and a sawmill hand, and finished the 8th grade. And my mother also finished the 8th grade. And so books were not very important in their lives. And when I was 2, my father died, and my mother was left with 4 kids and no education, and ended up being a cafeteria worker, a cook, and worked raising the 4 of us on about $5-10 a week, and working all the time. So in terms of being read to as a child, I was never read to. In fact, I don't really remember, other than the Bible, there being many books in the house at all. When there were comic books, which is what I preferred actually in terms of reading, my mother would prefer that they disappeared very quickly. But so I went to school at age 5, and have really not many memories, even though I went to the same school, grades 1 through 12 in the same building. There were 500 kids in this grades 1 through 12 school in Suwannee County, Florida. And I remember enjoying school, but I don't really remember reading until the 3rd grade. But I remember it was just this amazing feeling to be able to read independently on your own. And probably a lot of the other kids were reading long before I was. I don't remember. The kids in town, probably they were, but certainly I was not. But it happened in the 3rd grade. I do remember that. Could have happened before then. But the really first huge awareness of what books could be for you and do for you was in the 4th grade, when the principal used to come into the classroom about once a week and would read books to us. And what I remember particularly with him reading were the Bobbsey Twins, which I thought was great literature at the time, but learned later when I took my first children's literature course, it really didn't qualify as that. But it was great reading about the Bobbsey Twins. I remember just with amazement the story that he read about them being someplace, and they were up in a mountain, and it was the 4th of July, and it was snowing. Well, growing up in North Florida, and I was 15 before I finally went out of the state, all the way to Georgia, which was about 50 miles away. But I could not imagine a place where it would be snowing in the middle of the summertime. And I think that image has just stayed in my mind because it just captivated the essence. You could find out about all these worlds that existed out there in books. And so I began to get books from the school library. There was no branch public library in the town, which was about 7 or 8 miles away. My little town, which consisted of all of 12 people, 2 or 3 families, a store, a post office, those kinds of things, a railroad depot. But the nearest big town where we went to school did not have a branch library. And the nearest library was actually about 30 miles away in terms of a public library, and I think was the first regional library system created in the country. Um, it's now the Suwannee River Regional System. There is a branch library in this little town of Branford, Florida now. So the school library was what we were dependent upon, and it was really not a very good collection at all. But it did have the Bobbsey Twins, and so I started reading the Bobbsey Twins. And then I discovered Walter Farley. This is not my copy. I do actually have a first edition of a Walter Farley book, which I found a few years ago. And if I'd known before today, I would have brought it in because it is a first edition. But discovered Walter Farley and the Black Stallion, and then I read, I think we had 5 or 6 of those books. I read all of those. Then I discovered, read more of the Bobbsey Twins as they were available. Jack London, I discovered stories about dogs and animals and all those kinds of things, because I was essentially growing up on a farm. And reading the Jack London stories. I'm trying to remember White Fang. Who wrote White Fang?
That was Jack.
Is that
London.
Jack London?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And all the ones about Alaska and all these years I dreamed about going to Alaska, and finally went last summer. Didn't see White Fang anyplace around. But it was this just amazing discovery of how fantastic books could be and what kinds of worlds they would describe. Well, in the ensuing years, I gained the family reputation as being the one who was always out on the porch in the swing, reading books and taking one to the tobacco fields, because the main cash crop growing in my part of Florida was tobacco, and always having a book of some type out there, reading it. And I attribute reading to not only opening up these worlds, but to my being able to, one, graduate from high school. Of the other 3 kids in my family, 2 of them did not finish high school. 1 brother did finish high school. And when I planned my career out there, thinking about what it was that I was going to do, the only 2 things that really kids growing up in my part of the world did was they joined the Army or they farmed. And we didn't own any land, so I wasn't going to be farming. And joining the Army, once my brother told me about life in Korea, didn't sound very appealing. And finally, in the 12th grade, about halfway through my senior year in high school, one of our ministers took us to a junior college that was church related. And I was just amazed that there was something called college. I had not taken any college prep courses at all. And I came back and I told my English teacher, I said, I think I'm going to college. And she said, you're what? And her great pride that year was getting me to be able to conjugate the verb to be. I knew no grammar. I'd not taken any math classes. I had taken 4 years of agriculture, in which the 2 things I learned was how to plant pine trees and the 4 strokes of the internal combustion engine. So I was not prepared for college at all. But I had read a tremendous amount of stuff. Nothing very good. I had not really read the great literary classics or any of those kinds of things. But I had a reputation. In fact, when I should have been taking a science or a math class, I was in study hall, and it was held in the library. I hope those days are gone. And I was telling Pat earlier today, my first real library job ever was reading Away All Boats, which is a book about the Second World War. And the school librarian asked me to read it to see if there were any dirty words in it. And so it wasn't a very good collection, but I read practically everything in there. I remember the school librarian trying to get me to read something about girls, of which the main character was a girl. And I said, no, I don't want to read about girls. Give me dogs. And so that was my career in terms of, and I missed all the children's literature books that you all may have read growing up or your parents read to you. I knew nothing about them. And in my senior year in college, I decided to become an elementary school teacher. And so to do that, you had to take a children's literature course. And it was just with amazement that I discovered there were those Newbery and Caldecott books. And I thought that was the most fantastic discovery I had ever made. And so I went through and read every one of the Newbery and Caldecott books. And that,
Even the Dark Frigate?
yes, oh, especially the Dark Frigate, yeah. Oh, and Rifles for Wadey. Oh, what a fantastic book. And one of my regrets is that I have not kept up with the Newbery books in recent years. And for my two girls, both my wife and I, she's also has a master's in library science, determined to read to our girls. And so we've done that really all these years. That what I discovered though was they like to have a book read, and then for some reason I started telling them stories that I would make up. And so we'd read books for a while, and then I'd tell them some story. The books were a lot better than the stories I made up.
Oh, I'll bet not.
So that's my life in literature.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. And look at now, you're a gifted professor. I mean, that's wonderful.
Well, not just a professor, maybe not gifted. Except we could go back to the statistics thing. Want to do that?
No. But that's great.